There is a particular silence that happens right before a person ruins their own life on purpose. I know it well because I was standing inside it. I was wearing my dead mother's wedding dress, the one she swore she'd never let anyone alter, and I had altered it. I had cut 3 inches off the hem and taken in the waist and sewn the small tear under the left arm with thread that didn't quite match, because nothing about that day matched anything. The man waiting for me at the front of the lodge was kind in the way a closed door is kind. Polite, solid, not mine. I had spent 11 months convincing myself that not mine could become enough. I had almost finished the job. I was 4 steps from the altar, close enough to smell the pine sap they'd brushed onto the railings to make the whole room smell like the forest we were about to sign away, and I had my chin up, and I had my breathing even, and I had decided, truly decided, to go through with it. Then the doors at the back of the lodge came off their hinges. And the one thing I had been lying to myself about for 3 years walked through the cold air and the broken wood, and looked at me like I was the only sentence he'd ever managed to finish. This is the story of the night I learned that you cannot bury a bond by burying your hope. You can only make the digging up of it louder. Let me go back 40 minutes, because the doors are the loud part, and the loud part is never where the real story lives. 40 minutes earlier I was in the bridal room, though calling it a bridal room was generous. It was the lodge's old map room, the one with the antlers on the wall and the wood stove that ticked when it cooled. My Aunt Junie was kneeling on the floor in her good dress, pinning the hem I had butchered, swearing softly through a mouth full of pins. "Stop fidgeting," she said. "I'm not fidgeting. You're doing the ring thing." I was doing the ring thing. I have a ring, my grandmother's, a thin band with a stone the color of weak tea that I wear on my right hand, and when I am frightened I turn it, around and around like winding a clock that doesn't tell time anymore. I have done it since I was 9. I did it at my mother's funeral until the skin under it went raw. Junie always notices. She is the only person left alive who notices. "It's just nerves, baby," she said, gentler now. "Everybody's nervous. Your mama threw up twice before she married your daddy and they were in love." She didn't mean it as a knife. It went in like one anyway. Because that was the part nobody at that wedding was supposed to say out loud. I was not in love. I was not even pretending well enough to fool the people pouring wine in the next room. I was marrying Holden Vance because 3 years of bad luck and 1 bad winter and 1 dead father had stacked up into a debt my family could not pay. And the Vance family, who owned half of Ridgewood and most of the timber rights in the valley, had offered a trade so old it didn't even feel cruel anymore. It felt like weather. Marry our son, merge the land claims, and the debt your father left behind disappears. Your brother keeps his home. Your aunt keeps her shop. The forest your grandmother is buried in stays in the family, even if the family it stays in is now partly theirs. That was the deal. That was the dress. That was the pine sap on the railings. "I keep thinking about the trees," I said. Junie sat back on her heels. "What trees?" "The ones along the ridge. The ones Gran planted." I turned the ring. "After tonight they're half his, and then someday all his, and then his kids. People I haven't met yet are going to walk through her trees and not know her name." Junie's face did something complicated. She put her hand flat against my cheek, pins and all. "That is the most poetic way I have ever heard somebody talk themselves into a corner," she said. "You're allowed to not do this, Marin, you know that." "No," I said, "I'm not." And that was true. That was the whole truth, the kind that doesn't soften no matter how long you hold it. If I didn't do it, Theo lost the house. My brother is 19. He stutters when he's tired and he draws birds in the margins of everything, and he has been carrying the casseroles to the neighbors all week like a small, grim soldier, because that's what you do when you have a wedding instead of a funeral, and you're not sure which one you're actually attending. I was not going to be the reason he lost the only home he's ever known. I had already decided. I had decided so many times that the decision had worn smooth, like a stone in a pocket. So I stood up. I let Junie finish the hymn. I let her fix my hair where it had come loose, and I let her hold both my hands and pray over them in the old way, the way our grandmother used to, low and fast and not entirely in English, and I let myself believe for one full minute that I was a woman about to be happy. Then I walked out into the hall, and the smell hit me. You have to understand something about what I am, what we are, the people in that valley. We are not ordinary, we never have been. There is a thing that lives under our skin, old and four-legged and patient, and most of the time it sleeps and lets us be teachers and shopkeepers and fathers who lose money and daughters who fix hymns. But it wakes up for certain things. It wakes up for a full moon. It wakes up for danger. And it wakes up once, only once in a whole life, for most of us, for the one person the world made to match you. We call it the bond. The older folks call it being fated, which always sounded to me like something out of a story until it happened to me. The young ones joke about it, the way you joke about lightning when you've never been hit. You don't understand it until your whole body becomes a compass and the needle is a person. I'd felt it exactly once, 3 years ago, and then I'd spent 3 years pretending I'd imagined it because the boy on the other end of that needle had left in the middle of the night and never come back, and you cannot stay in love with a direction that walks away from you. You just can't. So I'd unlearned him. Stone by stone, I'd unlearned him. And here, in a hallway that smelled of pine sap and candle wax, and my aunt's perfume under all of it, faint as a sound from another room, I smelled rain on cedar. His scent. I stopped walking. Marin, Junie touched my elbow. What is it? Nothing, I said too fast. Smelled the kitchen, I'm fine. I was not fine. Some animal part of me had stood straight up inside my chest and started screaming. But I'd had 3 years of practice at sitting on that animal, and I sat on it now. He's not here, I told the screaming thing. He's been gone 3 years. He doesn't even know there's a wedding. You're nervous and you're sad and your brain is handing you the worst possible comfort because that's what brains do. I made myself believe it. I'm good at making myself believe things. It is, possibly, my only real talent. The lodge's main hall was full. Half the valley had come, partly out of love for my family and partly out of that very specific human hunger to watch one family fold itself into a richer one. The way you'd watch a storm move in over the lake, beautiful, a little frightening. None of your business, but you can't look away. The Vances had paid for everything. There were white flowers I didn't recognize and a string quartet, and an arch of cut branches at the front that some florist had assembled to look like the forest, which struck me as a particular kind of cruelty, building a fake forest in a room where I was trading away a real one. Holden stood under the arch. I want to be fair to Holden, because the easy version of this story makes him a villain and he wasn't one. He was tall and careful and 26. He had his father's heavy jaw and none of his father's meanness. When we'd been introduced 11 months earlier, a dinner arranged like a treaty negotiation, because that's what it was, he had been the only person at the table to ask me what I wanted, and when I couldn't answer, he hadn't pushed. Over the months since, he'd been decent in 100 small ways. He'd learned that I take my coffee bitter. He'd fixed the latch on Theo's bike without being asked. He had never once, not one single time, pretended that either of us was doing this for love, and I had been grateful for that honesty the way you're grateful for a doctor who doesn't lie about the diagnosis. He met my eyes as I came down the aisle and gave me a small, steady nod. "We'll be all right," the nod said. "We'll build something out of this." I believed that too, for about 90 more seconds. The officiant was old Mr. Aldous, who'd married half the valley and buried the other half, and he had a voice like gravel underwater. He started in on the words. I watched his mouth move. I held my bouquet, white roses, baby's breath. A sprig of cedar that Theo had snuck in when no one was looking. My baby brother's small rebellion. His way of putting Gran's forest into my hands one last time. And I turned my grandmother's ring under the cover of the flowers, around and around, and I breathed. and I told myself this was the rest of my life, and I could survive the rest of my life. If anyone present, Mr. Aldous said, because he was old enough to still say it and mean it, knows any reason these two should not be joined. And the back doors blew open. Not opened. Blew. Both of them at once, slamming back against the log walls hard enough that one came partly off its top hinge and hung there, drunk and creaking. Cold mountain air rushed in down the whole length of the hall, snuffing the candles in a wave, and every person in that room turned at once with the same animal jerk of the head, because every person in that room was what I am, and every person in that room felt the thing come through the door before they saw it. I didn't have to turn around. I already knew. The scent of rain on cedar filled the entire hall like a struck bell, and my body, my traitor body, the body I had spent 3 years training like a difficult dog, lit up from the soles of my feet to the roots of my hair, and the animal I'd been sitting on threw me clean off. I turned around. Elias Mercer stood in the wreck of the doorway with the night behind him. He looked terrible. That was the first thing I registered absurdly before anything else. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, a half-healed cut over one eyebrow, 3 years of road, and whether worn into a face I had once known better than my own. His jacket was soaked through. His boots had left a trail across the lodge floor. He was breathing like he'd run the last mile, and maybe he had. He had a leather folder clutched in one hand, gripped so hard the knuckles had gone white, and I would not understand the importance of that folder for another full hour, so I didn't look at it. I looked at his face. He looked at mine. And the whole room, 140 people, the quartet frozen mid-note, Holden gone still beside me, Mr. Aldous with his mouth open and the question still hanging in the air, the whole room disappeared. It just went. Like someone had turned down the volume on the entire world except for the 2 feet of space directly between his eyes and mine. "Marin," he said. He had a low voice. He had always had a low voice. He said my name the way you'd set down something you'd carried a very long way and were afraid to break. I should have felt rage. I had planned, in the 3 years of nights I'd lain awake building speeches at him, to feel rage. I had a whole architecture of rage ready, cathedral-sized. You left. You left in the dark without a word, and I waited at the bottom of the trail until the sun came up like an idiot, and you never came, and I had to learn how to breathe without the thing that breathing was for. I had that speech. I'd polished it for 3 years. What I felt instead was the bond 3 years dammed up, breaking all at once, and under the bond, under the screaming animal joy of it, a grief so total it folded my knees. Because he was here. He was here. And he was 11 months and 1 signature too late. "You can't be here," I said. My voice came out wrong thin. "Eli, you can't be here." "I know." He took a step into the hall, and a low warning sound moved through the crowd, because the Vances were here, all of them, and the Vances and the Mercers had a history I'd only ever heard in pieces. He stopped. He held up the hand that wasn't strangling the leather folder, palm out, the universal gesture for "I'm not here to fight," though every line of his body said he would, if it came to that, against this entire room and lose and not care. "I'm not going to stop the wedding," he said, and the lie of that was so enormous that someone in the crowd actually laughed, a short shocked bark, because he had just torn the doors off their hinges to do exactly that. "Marin, I need 90 seconds. I have driven for 2 days. Give me 90 seconds, and if you still want to marry him, I will walk back out that door and you will never see me again. I swear it on my mother's grave. 90 seconds. And here is the morally heavy thing, the first of several that night, and the one I am least proud of and most. I wanted to give them to him. God help me. I was standing at the altar in my dead mother's dress, holding my baby brother's stolen sprig of cedar, with a good man beside me who had fixed a bicycle latch and learned how I take my coffee, with my brother's entire future resting on the next 4 minutes. And the deepest, oldest, truest part of me wanted to drop the bouquet and cross that floor and give Elias Mercer not 90 seconds, but every second I had left. That is what the bond does. It does not care that you have made promises. It does not care that there are casseroles in the neighbor's kitchens and a debt with your father's signature on it and a 19-year-old who draws birds in the margins. It is older than all of that. It is older than language. It does not negotiate. Marin, Holden's voice beside me. Low, not angry, that was the worst of it. He wasn't even angry, he sounded careful, the way you'd speak to someone standing near an edge. Do you know this man? I couldn't answer. My mouth wouldn't make the shape of the answer. Junie answered for me, from the front row, in a whisper that carried in the dead silent hall the way only the worst truths do. That's the Mercer boy, she said. That's the one and she stopped herself, but she didn't have to finish, because Holden was not stupid. Holden had never once been stupid, and I watched understanding move across his face like the shadow of a cloud crossing a field. He looked at Eli. He looked at me. He looked at the 2 feet of charged air between us that the whole valley could feel like static before a storm. And his jaw, that heavy careful jaw, tightened. 90 seconds, Eli said again, softer now only to me. Please. I looked at the folder in his hand. I still didn't understand it. I looked at the cut over his eyebrow and the road worn into his face, and the 3 years standing in the doorway between us with the cold night at its back. I looked at Holden, who had gone very still and very dignified, a man absorbing in front of 140 people the thing he must have suspected all along, that he had been about to marry a woman whose compass pointed somewhere else. I looked at Theo, my brother, sitting in the second row in his too big borrowed suit, his face white, his hands twisted in his lap, 19 years old, the house, the shop, Grand's trees along the ridge. Everything I was about to sell to keep him safe, and the buyer was waiting under the cedar arch, and the only thing standing in the way was a soaking wet man with a leather folder and a low voice, and 3 years of unanswered questions, and the unbearable, undeniable, bone-deep fact that he was mine and I was his, and we both knew it, and the entire valley now knew it too. The wood stove ticked somewhere behind me, a candle that hadn't quite gone out guttered and died. Outside, the wind moved through Grand's trees along the ridge, the ones I could no longer see in the dark, the ones that were about to belong to other people. I turned my grandmother's ring around once, under the cedar and the white roses, where no one could see my hands shaking. And I opened my mouth to make the most important decision of my life, with absolutely no idea what was going to come out. What came out was this. Why, I said, not loud, but the whole room heard it. Why did you leave? It wasn't 90 seconds. It wasn't permission. It was 3 years of one single question, finally let out of its cage. Eli's whole face broke open. Because if I'd stayed, he said, they would have taken everything from your family that night, and I couldn't let them, and I couldn't tell you because if you'd known, you'd have stopped me. He took one more step, and this time no one growled because there was something in his voice that stopped them. Marin, the debt, the thing you're about to marry him to pay. He held up the leather folder at last, and his hand was shaking as badly as mine. I've spent 3 years undoing it. That's where I've been. That's the only place I've been. It's paid, he'd said. You don't have to do this. I've replayed the next few seconds more times than I can count, and I still can't tell you what my face did. I only know what the room did. 140 people who had come to watch a sad girl marry a rich family for the sake of a debt suddenly understood that the debt had a third person standing in the doorway, and that nothing about the evening was going to go the way the invitations had promised. It was Marcus Vance who broke the silence, Holden's father, the alpha of the Vance pack, a big slab of a man in a charcoal suit, sitting in the front row with his wife's hand under his like a king holding court. He stood, slowly, the way mountains would stand if they could. This is a private ceremony, he said, and his voice did the thing the old powerful ones can do, where it presses on the back of your neck even when you're not the one being spoken to. You've crashed a wedding, Mercer. Say your piece and get out before I have you removed. The debt's bought, Marcus. Eli didn't flinch. I'll give him that 3 years on the road had filed something hard and quiet into him, and he stood in front of the most dangerous man in the valley like a man with nothing left to lose, which is the only kind of person such men can't touch. Every dollar, the lien on the Callaway land, the loan your bank held, the back taxes, all of it. I've got the discharge papers right here. Notarized this morning 2 counties over before I drove straight through to get here. He lifted the folder a fraction higher. She doesn't owe you anything, which means she doesn't have to marry your son, which means, and here his voice did finally crack just slightly, just enough, she gets to choose. For the first time in 3 years, she gets to actually choose. Let me see it, Holden said. Everyone turned. Holden had stepped out from under the cedar arch, and he was holding out his hand toward Eli, and his face had gone unreadable in the way that careful men's faces do when they're feeling too much. Holden, his father said, a warning. Let me see it, Eli, Holden said again, ignoring his father entirely. And there was something in him using Eli's first name, not Mercer, not the family slur, the name that made my throat close. Holden crossed the floor. Eli, after a moment, handed him the folder. And in the middle of my wedding, my groom and my fated mate stood 3 feet apart under a fake forest, while one of them read papers proving the other had spent 3 years dismantling the very reason the wedding existed. I watched Holden read. I watched his eyes move down the page and stop and go back up and read again. I watched his careful jaw work. He was good with documents. He ran half his father's business affairs. Everyone knew that, and it didn't take him long. He looked up, not at Eli, at me. It's real, he said quietly. Marin, it's real, the debt's gone. I think a part of me had still been braced for it to be a lie, or a trick, or a desperate man's bluff. Because if it was real, then the floor I had built my whole sacrifice on simply wasn't there, and never had been for almost a year, while I'd been altering my mother's dress and learning to swallow my own life. If it was real, then I had been ready to give away the trees and the choice and the rest of my days for a debt that a man who'd vanished into the dark had been quietly, secretly, agonizingly paying off the whole time. How, I heard myself say, how could you possibly? 2 days a week in the mines up north, Eli said. Nights doing recovery diving on the reservoir cruise that pays stupid money because it's stupid dangerous. Anything that paid and nobody asked questions about a Mercer doing it. I've slept in my truck for the better part of 3 years, Marin. I'm telling you that not so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you'll believe it's real. Because I knew you wouldn't take it from me. I knew you'd never let me sacrifice that much for you. So I didn't tell you, I just did it, and I drove here praying I wasn't an hour too late. He laughed then, a wrecked, exhausted sound that wasn't a laugh at all. Turns out I was about 90 seconds early. And this is the part where I should tell you I ran into his arms, because that's how the story wants to go. That's the shape the Bond was screaming for. Every cell in my body straining toward him like a plant toward the only window in the room. But I didn't, because I was so angry. It came up out of the grief like floodwater finding the crack in the dam, and once it started it would not stop. I crossed the floor not to him, but at him, and the bouquet was still in my hand, and I was distantly aware that I was about to make a scene at my own wedding, and I did not care one single bit. 3 years, I said. My voice was shaking so hard the words came in pieces. 3 years, Eli, you let me think you left. You let the whole valley think you abandoned me. You let me wait at the bottom of that trail until sunrise. You let me learn how to live without I couldn't finish it. I gestured between us, the space, the bond, the thing there are no clean words for. And you could have written one line. One. I'm okay. I'm coming back. Wait for me. 3 years and you couldn't spare me one line. So I didn't have to feel like a fool for loving a ghost. If I'd written that line, he said very low, you'd have waited. And the moment your debt came due and they came for the house, you'd have done something reckless to save Theo because that is exactly who you are, and you'd have gotten yourself hurt or worse, and I wouldn't have been there to stop it because I'd have been 300 miles away in a mine. The only way to keep you safe was to make you stop waiting, so I had to let you hate me. His voice broke fully now, all the way through. Do you have any idea what it cost me to spend 3 years making the person I love hate me on purpose? It was the worst thing I have ever done. And I'd do it again. I'd do it again tonight if it kept you safe, even knowing it might mean I'd walk in here and watch you say yes to him. The hall was so quiet I could hear the broken door creaking on its one good hinge. That wasn't your choice to make, I whispered. I know. You don't get to decide what I'm allowed to sacrifice. You don't get to disappear and call it love. I know, Marin. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes just for a second, and I saw exactly how close to the end of himself he was. You think I haven't said that to myself every night for 3 years? You're right. You're completely right. I made the wrong call. I made it for the right reason, and it was still the wrong call, and I robbed you of 3 years, and I will spend the rest of my life sorry for it. But I couldn't fix the past. The only thing I could do was make sure you didn't have to pay for my family's old war with his. He dropped his hand. He looked at me, raw, undefended, finished. I'm not here to tell you to choose me. I lost the right to ask for that the night I left. I'm here so you can choose anything. That's all. That's the whole thing I drove 2 days for, so that for once nobody owns your next move but you. And there it was, the thing that undid me. Because he could have come back and claimed me. The bond would have backed him. Half that room would have understood it. In the old stories, the fated mate sweeps in and takes what's his, and everyone weeps with joy. He could have made it about us. Instead, he had made it about me, about giving me back a choice he had no guarantee I'd spend on him. And that, more than the doors coming off the hinges, more than the 3 years in the mines, was the thing that told me Elias Mercer had not stopped being mine for one single day. But I want to tell you about Holden now, because the story is not fair to him, and I need to be. While Eli and I had been tearing each other open in the middle of the aisle, Holden had stood there holding the discharge papers, and he had not said a word. When I finally turned back toward him, toward the altar, toward the man I'd been 4 steps from marrying, I expected fury. I would have understood fury. I'd just been told, in front of his entire family and half the valley, that the woman in his mother's borrowed pearls had a fated mate standing in the wreckage of the door, and that I'd been about to marry him under false pretenses, for a debt that no longer existed. Holden wasn't furious. Holden looked, of all things, relieved. He stepped close to me, close enough that the next part was just for the 2 of us, though in a room full of our kind, there's no such thing as private. He looked down at me with that heavy, careful face, and what I saw in it was not a broken heart. It was a man being let off a hook he'd been hanging on just as long as I had. Marin, he said, very quietly, can I tell you something I should have told you 11 months ago? I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. I never wanted this either. I stared at him. My father arranged it, he said. The same way yours got you into it, except mine's still alive to lean on me about it. I went along because it was good for the family, and because you were kind and smart, and I figured kind and smart was more than most arranged matches get. And I told myself that was enough. He glanced just once toward the back of the room, and I followed his glance, and there, standing near the broken door, half in shadow, was Sarah Lindqvist, who ran the feed store, who'd been Holden's friend since they were children, who I had never once thought about, and who was now looking at Holden with her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes full. And I understood. Of course. Of course. You're not the only one in this valley who's been told who they're allowed to love, Holden said, and he smiled, sad and real. I just didn't have anybody crash through the doors to remind me I was allowed to want different. I started to cry. I'd been holding it the whole night, and it came now, ugly and silent, and Holden, bless him forever, reached out and very gently took the cedar sprig out of my bouquet, the one Theo had snuck in, and pressed it back into my hand and folded my fingers around it. Keep your grandmother's trees, he said. They were never ours. I'm sorry it took a wedding to figure that out. Holden, your father. My father is going to be a problem, he said, and his eyes flicked toward Marcus Vance, who had risen fully to his feet now and whose face had gone the dangerous flat color of a man watching a carefully built arrangement fall apart in public. For both our families, I won't lie to you about that. The debt being paid means the land stays yours, but it also means the merger he wanted is dead and Marcus Vance does not lose gracefully. There'll be a reckoning, probably an ugly one. He squeezed my shoulder. But that's a tomorrow problem. Tonight, he stepped back. He looked at me and then at Eli, and he raised his voice so the room could hear him, and what he did next was the bravest thing I saw anyone do that whole long night. Tonight, Holden Vance announced, to a hall full of his own family, there isn't going to be a wedding. The room erupted. I won't try to write all of it down. It was chaos, Marcus Vance's voice rising over everyone, demanding to know what his son thought he was doing. Holden's mother weeping into her pearls. Junie on her feet shouting something fierce and protective at anyone who came near me. Old Mr. Aldous standing there with his book still open, blinking like a man woken from a nap into the wrong century. Theo pushing through the crowd toward me with his face shining and terrified, and his too big suit, and his arms already coming up to grab me. And through all of it, the noise, the bodies, the collapse of 11 months of plans, Eli stood very still in the middle of the floor and did not come toward me. He waited. He had said he wouldn't ask, and he didn't. He just stood there with the night at his back and the rain still drying in his hair, and he watched me the way you watch a door you're not sure you're allowed to walk through. And he left the last step in the whole journey for me to take, because that was the gift. That was the entire 2-day drive. That was the 3 years in the mines. The last step was mine. Theo reached me first. He grabbed me so hard the breath went out of me, my baby brother, and he was crying and laughing and trying to talk, and his stutter had him completely. And what he managed to get out, finally, with his face buried in my shoulder, was, "You don't have to, Marin, you don't have to do it, we're okay." He said, "We're okay. The house, we keep the house, you don't have to." "I know," I said into his hair. "I know, baby, I know." And over his shoulder, across the wreck of my wedding, I looked at Elias Mercer. 3 years of rage, 3 years of grief, 3 years of unlearning him stone by stone, and here he was making me learn him all over again in the space of one ruined evening. And I was so tired suddenly, so bone-tired of being the strong one, the one who sacrifices, the one who alters the dress and swallows the life and waits at the bottom of trails until sunrise. I had spent my whole adult life being the person who gives things up so other people can be safe. My mother's death. My father's debt. Theo's future, the trees, the man. I had given and given and given. For once, for one single moment in the wreckage of a wedding that was never going to happen, I let myself think about what I wanted. I wanted to be furious with him for longer. He hadn't earned an easy forgiveness, and I wasn't going to hand him one. I wanted to understand why he thought disappearing was ever a kindness, and I was going to make him explain it to me 100 more times until it stopped feeling like a wound. I wanted to keep my grandmother's trees and walk through them myself and teach Theo's future children her name. And underneath all of that, older than all of that, the compass needle that had pointed at one man for 3 years through every storm I'd thrown at it, I wanted him. Not the way the bond demanded, helpless and inevitable, but the way I'd want anything I'd chosen with my eyes open. I wanted to choose him on purpose, the way you choose to keep a hard promise, the way you choose to plant a tree you won't live to sit under. But not tonight. That was the decision, not the romantic one, the true one. I let go of Theo. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing whatever was left of the makeup Junie had so carefully done. I walked across the floor, and the room hushed again, because they all wanted to see which man I'd walk to. I didn't walk to either one. I stopped in the open space between Holden and Eli in the middle of the fake forest, and I turned to face the whole hall, and I found my voice, the real one, the steady one, the one I'd been saving, and I said, "Thank you all for coming." A startled ripple of something that wasn't quite laughter. "There's not going to be a wedding tonight," I said. I think most of you have figured that out. The debt my father left is paid by someone who shouldn't have had to, and who I'm not finished being angry at. I looked at Eli when I said it and watched him take it and watched him understand that being not finished with was 1,000 times better than being finished. My family keeps our home. My grandmother's trees stay in our family. And I had to stop. I had to breathe. I'm going home tonight, I said. By myself. To sit in my own house that I get to keep and figure out for the first time in 3 years what I actually want. And anybody who has a problem with that, I let my eyes go just for a second to Marcus Vance standing there with the storm gathering on his face, can take it up with me in the morning. Not tonight. Tonight's mine. And then I did the thing I'd been wanting to do all night. I dropped the bouquet. I just opened my hand and let it fall, the white roses, the baby's breath, all of it, except for the one sprig of cedar from my grandmother's trees, which I kept, which I closed in my fist and pressed against my chest. The flowers hit the floor with a soft, final sound, and I stepped over them, and I walked down the aisle toward the broken doors and the cold, clean night beyond them, past Eli, close enough to feel the bond flare like a struck match, close enough to smell rain on cedar, close enough that I could have stopped. I didn't stop, but as I passed him, without slowing, without looking at him, I said, just for him, just loud enough, "Don't you dare leave again." I heard him exhale like he'd been holding his breath for 3 years. "I won't," he said. "I swear it. I'll be wherever you want me for as long as it takes. I'm not going anywhere ever again." I walked out into the night. But I'd be lying if I said that was the end of it. Because Marcus Vance was still standing in that hall with his merger dead, and his pride in pieces in front of the whole valley. And men like Marcus Vance do not let the sun rise on a humiliation without doing something about it. And somewhere in the dark behind me, I could already feel the next storm gathering, not the bond this time, but something colder. I want to walk you through the 2 days in between first, because they mattered, and because I have learned that the quiet parts are where people actually change. The doors coming off the hinges were loud. What happened in the kitchen of my grandmother's house over the next 48 hours was not loud at all, and it remade my whole life. I didn't see Eli that first night. I told him not to leave, and I'd meant it, but I'd also walked out of my own wedding, and I needed to be alone in my own skin before I could stand to be in a room with the person who'd put me there. So I went home. I peeled off my mother's dress in the dark and hung it back in the closet where it had lived for 20 years, and I sat at the kitchen table with the sprig of cedar in front of me and Theo across from me, and we didn't talk much. He made tea. He's terrible at making tea. It was the best tea I've ever had. "He really paid it all?" Theo asked. "At some point near 2 in the morning. All of it, the whole everything." "All of it," I said. Theo turned his mug around in his hands. He has my habit, or I have his, the turning thing, the winding of a clock that doesn't tell time. "That's a lot of years to give somebody without telling them," he said. That's a stupid amount of years, Marin." "It is," I said. "Are you gonna forgive him?" I thought about it. I've been thinking about it since the doors came off the hinges, and I expected to keep thinking about it for a long time. "I'm going to try to," I said finally. "Forgiving somebody isn't a thing you do once. It's a thing you do every morning for a really long time until one morning you wake up and find out you already did it and you didn't notice when. I'm at the start of that. He's got a lot of mornings ahead of him." I looked at my brother. "But yeah, I think I am." Theo nodded slowly. Then he drew a bird in the steam fogged on the window, he can't help it, birds, always birds, and said very quietly, not looking at me, "I'm glad you don't have to marry somebody you don't love so I can keep my room. I was gonna let you do it. I'm sorry. I should have stopped you and I was too scared. I'm sorry, Marin." And I came around the table and held my baby brother while he cried, the second time that week, the casserole soldier finally allowed to be 19, and I thought, This is what I almost gave up the trees for, and it would have been worth it, and I'm so glad I don't have to find out. The next morning Eli came to the house. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, actually with his hat in his hands, like something out of one of Gran's old stories. And he didn't try to come in, and he didn't try to touch me, and he didn't say a single soft romantic thing. He said, "I figured you've got questions. I'm going to stand here and answer every single one of them, for as long as you want, even the ones that make me look bad. Especially the ones that make me look bad." So I made him. I made him stand on that porch for the better part of 3 hours and account for 3 years, where he'd been month by month, why he hadn't trusted me with the truth. The night he left, what actually happened, the whole of it, not the pieces. He told me. It was worse than the pieces. The short version is that the old feud between his family and the Vances had come to a head the same winter my father died, and there'd been a confrontation up on the ridge, near Gran's trees, and Eli's father had been killed in it. And in the chaos of that night, Marcus Vance had made my family an offer that was really a threat. The debt could go away, or it could be called all at once, in a way that would have put Theo and Junie out of the house inside a month. And Eli, 19 years old and freshly fatherless and standing in the snow with the body of the only parent he had left, had understood that the one thing of value he possessed, the only leverage in the world he had over a man like Marcus Vance, was himself, his absence, his agreement to disappear and never contest the Vance claim to the valley, in exchange for time for me to find another way out, time he then spent making sure I'd never need to. "I traded myself for your 3 years," he said, "and I'm not telling you that to make you feel like you owe me. I'm telling you because you asked what happened and you deserve the true thing and not the kind one. I made a deal I had no right to make about your life. I'd take it back if I could. I can't. All I can do is stand on your porch and let you decide what it was worth." I didn't forgive him that day either, but I let him sit in the kitchen. And Junie, who had threatened to skin him alive, watched him drink his coffee bitter. He takes it bitter, the same as me, of course he does, and softened by maybe 2 degrees, which for Junie is practically a wedding blessing. It was the third night that Marcus Vance came for us. He didn't come alone, and he didn't come to talk. That's the thing you have to understand about men like him. They can absorb the loss of money. They can even absorb the loss of land, but they cannot absorb being made small in front of the people they rule. Half the valley had watched his son call off the wedding and walk away from the merger. Half the valley had watched a Mercer crash through the doors and win. And Marcus Vance had spent 3 days letting that humiliation harden into something with teeth. What he came to do was simple and old and ugly. He came to invoke the old claim. There's a law in our kind, older than the valley, that says a faded bond unacknowledged for 3 years can be contested. That if a mate abandons the bond and stays gone past 3 winters, the bond can be declared broken, and another claim can be laid. Marcus Vance had a lawyer's grasp of every old law that had ever favored a Vance, and he stood in my grandmother's yard in the dark with 6 of his people behind him, and declared that Elias Mercer had abandoned the bond by his own admission, in front of 140 witnesses, and that therefore the bond was forfeit, and that therefore Holden's claim, the merger, the marriage, could be enforced after all, paid debt or no. It was nonsense. It was also, technically, the law, and the law in our valley had a way of meaning whatever the Vances needed it to mean. I was standing on the porch when he laid it out. Eli was beside me. He'd been at the house every day, sleeping in his truck down the lane because I wasn't ready to let him sleep anywhere closer, and the bond between us hummed like a wire in a wind. Thea was behind us in the doorway. Junie had the shotgun she keeps for coyotes, though we all knew it wasn't coyotes she was thinking about. And I felt the old exhaustion come up in me. The here we go again. The of course I don't get to keep the good thing. The lifelong certainty that whenever I reach for something it gets taken. And I felt Eli go tense beside me, ready to do something stupid and final, ready to throw himself between me and Marcus Vance the way he'd thrown himself between me and the debt. And I knew that if I let him, he'd sacrifice himself all over again, and we'd be right back at the beginning. 2 people in love saving each other to death. So I did the thing he'd given me. The thing he'd driven 2 days and worked 3 years to hand me. I chose. No, I said. I stepped down off the porch. Eli's hand caught my wrist, don't. And I gently took it back, let me. Because this was mine to do, and I walked across the dark yard until I was standing in front of Marcus Vance, close enough to smell the cigar and the cold on him. This enormous, dangerous man who'd been bending my family's life since before I was old enough to understand it. You want to talk about abandonment, I said. Fine, let's. Eli left for 3 years, you're right. He abandoned the bond by the letter of your old law. But here's the thing about that law, Marcus. It was written by people who believed a bond was a thing that could be forfeited, that it was property, that it belonged to whoever showed up to claim it. I held up my right hand, my grandmother's ring catching what little light there was. It doesn't. It's not a deed. You can't repossess it. The bond's not broken because a court of old men says it's broken. It's broken or it's whole based on one thing and one thing only, whether the two people on either end of it still answer when it pulls. And I'm standing here telling you in front of your 6 men and my aunt's shotgun and God and everybody that it pulled at me every single day for 3 years and I never stopped answering. Not once. So it was never abandoned. It was just waiting. You can't contest a bond that one of the mates kept alive the whole time on her own. There's no law for that. Because nobody ever thought a person could be that stubborn. Marcus Vance looked at me for a long moment. The yard was dead silent except for the wind in the ridge trees. You think being stubborn is going to stand up against 3 generations of Vances and the oldest law in this valley, he said, and his voice was quiet now, which was worse than loud. You're a dead poor girl in a dead woman's house, Marin Calloway. You have a sprig of cedar and a feud you didn't start. I have a valley. You're right, I said. I can't beat you. Not in a fight, not in a court, not on the law, you'd win. So I'm not going to fight you. I saw it confuse him. I saw the 6 men behind him shift. I'm going to do something you can't win against, I said. I'm going to tell the truth out loud, over and over to everyone forever. I'm going to stand in the middle of Ridgewood and tell every single person in this valley exactly what you offered my dying father, and exactly what you forced a 19-year-old to trade to keep his family in their house, and exactly what kind of man calls in a paid debt and a broken-hearted girl to feed his own pride. I'm not strong enough to beat you, Marcus, but I am strong enough to make sure that everyone who follows you knows precisely what they're following, and men like you can survive losing money and losing land. You told me so yourself 3 days ago with your eyes when Holden walked away. The one thing you can't survive is the whole valley knowing who you really are. So go ahead, enforce your claim. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure every soul in this valley knows the price of it. Your move. It is a strange thing to watch a mountain decide whether to fall on you. Marcus Vance looked at me. He looked at Eli on the porch, vibrating with the need to protect me and holding himself back because I'd asked him to. He looked at Junie's shotgun and at Theo in the doorway, and at the dark windows of the house where my grandmother is buried out back among her trees. And I will never fully know what tipped it. Maybe it was the math of a humiliation that would only grow. Maybe somewhere in him there was a sliver of the decency that had somehow grown whole in his son. He made a sound in his chest, low and disgusted, and he turned around. This valley's going to break your heart, girl, he said over his shoulder. Stubborn doesn't keep the lights on. Neither does cruelty, I said, but here we both are. And he left, 6 men and all, into the dark, and I stood in the middle of my grandmother's yard and shook so hard I thought I'd come apart, the way you only shake after the dangerous thing is over, when your body finally lets itself understand what it just did. Eli reached me before I fell. He didn't say anything clever. He just put his arms around me and held me up, and I let him. For the first time in 3 years I let him, and I felt the bond settle between us. Not the screaming compass needle pull of the wedding hall, but something quieter, something that had survived a wedding and a reckoning and 3 years of dark, something that had been waiting and was done waiting. I didn't forgive him all at once. I want to be honest about that, because the stories always end with the forgiving, and that's not how it went. It took mornings, a lot of them. It took him moving from his truck to Junie's spare room. Not the house, not yet. Junie made that thunderously clear. And getting work in the valley that didn't require him to vanish into a mine. It took him learning Theo stutter the way I'd once learned how he took his coffee, learning to wait through it, never finishing the boy's sentences. It took a lot of arguments, real ones, about the 3 years, about the choosing for me, about all the ways two stubborn people who love each other can still wound each other after the dramatic part is over and the ordinary part begins. The ordinary part is harder. Nobody tells you that. The doors coming off the hinges is easy. The 10,000 mornings after are the actual marriage, whether you ever have a wedding or not. We never did have a wedding. People ask sometimes. I tell them I had one already technically, and it didn't take, and I'm in no hurry to test the doors again. Mostly I tell them the truth, that a piece of paper felt small next to a man who traded 3 years of his life so I could keep a choice, and that I didn't need a ceremony to know what I'd chosen. I chose it on a porch with his hat in his hands. I chose it in a dark yard in front of a man who owned a valley. I keep choosing it most mornings, which is the only kind of choosing that's ever meant anything. The trees are still ours, Grand's trees along the ridge. Theo's children will walk through them someday and I'll teach them her name, the way I promised the floor of that lodge I would. I go up there sometimes in the evening when the light goes gold and slantwise through the pines and the whole ridge smells like rain on cedar, even when it isn't raining, even when he isn't there. Last week I found Eli up there before me, standing among the trees in the gold light, not doing anything, just standing, with his hat in his hands again. He didn't hear me come up. I stopped a little way off and watched him, this man I'd spent 3 years unlearning and the rest of my life learning back, and I thought about doors and debts, and the strange long arithmetic of how two people find their way home to each other through everything the world stacks up in between.